The first item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. I'll move it.
Second.
Second by Nelson. Hearing no discussion. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Items 2 through 6 constitute a consent agenda of routine action items to be considered by one motion. Items pass unanimously unless a separate vote is requested by a board member. Item 2 is approval of the minutes of the March 12th meeting. Item 3 is approval of the claims. Item 4 from the county treasurer is to approve the property tax refund request for parcel ending in 7009 in the amount of $515. Item 5 from board administration. On this, there is one petitioner to remove from this due to receiving income information today in the mail. Karen's discussed that with our assistant county attorney. And do we need to state the name of that applicant or initials, or is it sufficient to? Okay, and what are those? Okay, initials MW be excluded from this item, which includes A, approval of lifting tax suspension for initials MC, and B, approval of lifting tax suspensions for petitioners who failed to recertify their income or income does not qualify for continued tax suspension. That is the item we're talking about. And item 6 from Human Resources, the approval of memorandum of personnel transactions. I'll move the consent agenda.
Second.
Second by Raddick. Hearing no discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Item 7 for action from Building Services Director Kenny Schmitz. This is approval of low quote for law enforcement center condition air/refrigerant compressor replacement. And this is pending receipt of bids, which were received today. And Kenny will go over that in detail.
Kenny Schmitz, Building Services Director. Initially had this on the board's agenda for action. I talked to the chairman earlier today and asked him to leave this on the burner, but I would recommend that we don't take action on it today. I'd like to have you receive the information that I've got. That way, if I do come back to the board and ask you to move on this item, you'll already be up to speed and have the information that you need to make a decision. The reason I don't want to move as an action item is I do have all the information, including bids today. However, I believe that we can order and install a compressor in a quicker manner or more quickly than I once believed. I thought previously it would take 6 weeks to get one of these. I'm now informed that we can possibly do that much quicker, possibly can order and install within a week and a half to 2 week period. With that said, I don't want to spend upwards of $40,000 unless it's absolutely necessary. At this point, with our new LEC construction, even a week to 2 weeks of new information is helpful to us all. And so with that said, I'm willing to roll the dice a little bit, and I'll hand out this information. The first handout is the quotes that I received. There are 2 quotes.
Motion to receive, right?
Yeah, I'll move to receive all these documents into the
Second.
record. Second by Taylor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0.
The first quote, as you notice, has 2 different options on it. I'm really not entertaining option number 2 on there, so I would suggest if we do anything, it would be option number 1. This is the low bid. That cost would be $39,995. And that is from C.W. Suter. This bid is good until April 19th. The second bid is from Dunwell LLC. That bid is $41,357.79. The second handout I have for you is some information that I was asked to put together on temperatures and humidity history. That would hopefully be able to give the board a little insight on what past temperatures have been in Sioux City and what humidities have looked like, to help us try to base a good decision on how long you can wait before you really have to pull the trigger on something. And so that is some information I've got here for you.
I'd move to receive.
Second.
Motion by Taylor, second by Radig to receive. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0.
This just talks a little bit about temperatures and humidities in the past 5 years in the months of April, May, and June. You'll see I did a 5-year monthly average. The monthly average for April is 61.74% humidity. For May, it's 57.71%, and for June, it's 61.2%. What's important about those humidity levels, if you see at the bottom of the page, it says a normal range is 40 to 60%. Anytime you hit anything over 60, you're hitting a humidity level that is uncomfortable or not a good working environment. So that's what's important about that information. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you very much, Kenny, for this. So my concern, and normally it'd kind of be the opposite on wanting to hold off on something like this, but I guess my concern is with the public date right now of an estimated May for the new LEC potentially out there. Given the fact that in April of 2023, we hit 91 degrees. May of 2023, we hit 92 degrees. We're in a 24/7 facility that has to be constantly ventilated. In other words, there's no mitigating the fact that you've got to put in outdoor air all the time. So if there is a failure at 91 degrees, you're going to exceed ASHRAE temperatures pretty quickly.
Agreed.
So I guess my concern is, right now, just being, and I'm not questioning your decision, I'm actually very appreciative that you're forward-thinking and you're putting this in front of us, but it's March 19th. Even if we pulled the trigger, let's say today, and it was 2 weeks, best case scenario, we're into April. So I guess my concern is, knowing that we're not going to be out at least until May, or, you know, who knows, we could be in a pretty untenable situation fairly quickly where we're not making ASHRAE guideline temperatures, we're exceeding 80 degrees. You have occupants that are unruly, uncomfortable, and staff as well.
Sure.
So what's your, I guess my question then is, what's your trigger point in terms of, now I believe, let's say we get to April 2nd, and I know it sounds weird that we hit these temperatures, but we do. And sometimes it's just for a little time, but we're putting in that air no matter what, and when it's untempered. So
Sure.
what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are based on this. There are actually 4 of these compressors that operate. So we can operate up to 3 of them currently that operate and work as they should. Normally, we do not need that 4-stage compressor unless we are getting into a 90-degree and up temperature, along with fairly heavy humidity along with it. So this is where I'm willing to roll the dice for a few weeks to see what happens in case we have any new, new upcoming information from the LEC, it would appear to me if we could hold off a week, 2-3 weeks even, and not spend $40,000 that we don't have to, that's important. Again, it's rolling the dice a little bit, but I think it's worth the risk.
So that makes a whole lot more sense, so I appreciate that. So typically, that fourth stage compressor isn't until we're under complete load, like in June or July, where we're getting maxed out. In other words, these times where we're hitting 91 degrees may just be, I mean, that's the high for a very short period of time, right? An hour or
Yes.
two maybe, and maybe even just once in a, so we're gonna be able to operate, sounds like in your shoulder season months, like April and May, without even using a fourth compressor typically. Is that, am I understanding what you're?
We typically, yes, but this has not been a typical year so far,
Yeah.
which makes it very hard for us. But yes,
Okay. Makes a whole lot more sense. Thank you.
yes. The last handout I have was kind of comparison information that I was asked for. And what this does is, say we didn't replace this compressor, and/or we had another compressor failure, and we had an emergency situation where, okay, now we can't cool the jail. It's 95 degrees outside and it's humid, we're in trouble. We need to cool it down quick. This would provide a service where we bring in a mobile packaged unit. It's basically a rental unit, probably brought in on a semi. And this is pricing to do something like that. So I'll hand this information out.
Move to receive.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by Bittinger.
Nelson.
Nelson. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0.
So, and this unit is based off of our current LEC at providing half the air conditioning capacity it would need. So the initial investment would be for setup, and for the first month's rental would be $36,000. Each additional month after that would be $15,445. I was asked the question how much this would actually cost previous to getting this figures. My response was a lot, but I really had no idea what it really would be. So these are the minimum numbers. As you can see, there's some things that aren't included here, so it would be a little bit more. But that gives you a general outline of what it would be to provide half capacity for that facility. In other words, if we lost 2 compressors, this was what it would take to replace 2 compressors and run 2 of our current system, and then replace the 2 bad ones with this. So, any questions?
So the reason that for the public, that we talked about this is, again, Supervisor Taylor said a little bit ago, but we have to keep the temperature and humidity at a certain level in the jail, for the comfort of those inmates, but also to keep them from riding against themselves, against the guards. It becomes a major safety issue. And we should have been in the jail by now to where this was a non-factor, but we're not. And it's not at the fault of the county or the LEC. It's beyond our control, but we still have to try to mitigate damages. And that's where this gets tough, because we really only have 3 options, which is replace the compressor, have the semi-trailer that you just put up here, or move the inmates out. And so we have to try to do the lowest cost, but also the least amount of harm. And really, it really comes down to replacing the compressor, because moving the inmates somewhere else is probably not possible and extremely expensive. And then obviously renting this for a month will cost just about as much as fixing the compressor. So I appreciate that we've got insight on all 3 of these, that we could say, look, we are trying to mitigate damages that have been forced onto us. But it looks like our hands are tied here. More than likely, we may have to do this. Now, I think the good news is that the farmer on this board watches the weather very closely, multiple times a day, every single day. And the outlook for the rest of March and the first part of April is below normal temps, which is good. we've got very good forecasting 2 weeks out, and so I think that was the big question, was how long is it gonna take to get this thing and put it in? And so if we can work within that week and a half, 2 weeks, we can work within the forecast. So if we look ahead and we got a week of 95 coming, that's 2 weeks out, we can get mobilized and do something. But I think, you know, and I appreciate what you said, Jeremy, but I think, Kenny, I think you're right. Given the forecast that I've seen, I think we need to ride this out. We don't know. Yes, it seems like spring is early, but it could slow down here and it could be cold all through April and the first half of May. So I think we need to just watch the weather diligently, watch the temperature conditions in the jail. We've got 3 units that we can run if and when that temperature starts to tick up. And I think the second part of mitigating these damages is to try to kick this can down the road as far as we possibly can. So I think that we should probably punt today, but I appreciate all of this information, and we'll just have to hope that the weather can cooperate with us and that we can get in there, and all of this was just a waste of time.
Agreed, and there are, the board, whether they know it or not, has actually already done some mitigation, and that would be repairing. We had 2 compressors that were down and not working. One of those has already been repaired, so that was basically a mitigation that was done a few months ago. I thought, hey, we'll be able to get by with 3. We're getting really, really close. And then we had some new information come up, and which delayed some progress, and so brought us to where we're at here today. So the 4th compressor all of a sudden became a lot more important.
Kenny, are you still seeking other bids, or are these sufficient? And if so, would you at any point within the price, you know, being valid, recommend one of these 2?
Yes, these quotes are sufficient, and I would, again, recommend, if we moved forward, I would recommend option number 1 from C.W. Suter.
Okay.
Why not option 2?
I just think for the difference in the prices, that we'd be, we as a county would be better off in the long run with option number 1. I don't want to have to, basically option number 2 is using used parts.
Sure.
I'd rather not use used parts. I'd rather be able to rely on new replaced parts. And in the end, when we go to try to sell some of the items that are in our current LEC, we can say, hey, look, if we had replaced this, hey, look, we have a new rebuilt compressor that only operated for X amount of months that we're trying to sell.
Okay, so that would be a replacement with a remanufactured compressor for $39,995.
Yes, and the reason you don't see something that says brand new and you see remanufactured is they no longer manufacture this compressor.
I just figure it's 12.5% less, and at the end of the year, it's still gonna be worth half of whatever we pay for it or less, so. I don't know. And it's 1 year warranted anyway. We shouldn't need the warranty, hopefully.
On
Knock
the portable one, Kenny, I know it was for 1 month. Could they do less than that if let's say if the weather cooperated, but all of a sudden we maybe need 2 weeks to a time that we could move the inmates out? Is that flexible, or are they just a month minimum on that?
I think the initial setup and startup would be 1 month, and that's all they
Okay,
could do.
sure.
I can't say this without asking, but I would be surprised if we went beyond a month and went into another month for some unknown reason.
Sure.
That they would probably do that on a weekly basis, I would think.
And I guess for media clarity, this item is obviously discussing these components at the old LEC, because the new LEC is getting all new parts and they would be under warranty at this point. But because the new is not open, we are needing to make sure that the conditions are still meeting all regulations, guidelines, and you know, things that matter to the inspectors that we house those inmates in.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Keith. Changing the subject just slightly, a here about a week and a half ago, we did an inspection on our sprinkler system because it was due at the current LEC. Where otherwise, we'd have never done that, but to continue to operate legally, we had to do that, so, just things like that.
Mr. Taylor?
Let's say we do go down this road, and I'm hoping that we don't, but let's say that we do. What's in the current old LEC budget, if I'm pointing the right way, for these kind of repairs?
We never cover repairs of this size in our current operating budget. So this would have to be something of a CIP item or gaming revenue or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
Joshua, given the desire to adapt within a 2-week time period, would it be possible or recommended for the board to make any sort of approval pending Kenny's final okay? Or until the price is no longer valid? It just wouldn't be executed unless it was deemed appropriate?
You probably could fashion a motion in such a way where Kenny could get the approval of the board to go ahead and order it and bring it to the next agenda. If the situation was such that Kenny and the chair thought that was appropriate.
What do we want to do?
I guess the fact that we have a weekly meeting, I think unless there's some sort of in out of the, an ordinance, spike, I think, I think we're okay. Otherwise, I'm worried that we're gonna get into where these funds come from and maybe have a
Okay,
more elongated discussion than is worth it.
okay.
Yeah, I think if it was 30 days out or 6 weeks or something like that to get it, I would be more in favor of doing something tonight. But if we're looking at a week and a half, 2-week top turnaround, I think we can, with a weekly meeting, we can react pretty fast. We can watch the weather closely and hope for the best.
All right.
And the price is good for 4 more meetings, so.
Yep.
Anything else, Kenny?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Should
No
we
act-
get a motion to defer?
Yeah, I'll move to postpone.
Second?
Second by Bittinger. Any other comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Item 8 from the Board of Supervisors, submitted by myself and Mr. Nelson, who serves on the LAC Authority, of course. This is for action. This is approval to reallocate $471,000 from the American Rescue Plan Act standard allowance to the LAC Authority due to change orders submitted by the general contractor, Hausman Construction. For background purposes, on February 15th, 2022, the board allocated all of the $10 million of the standard allowance from ARPA due to the increased construction cost. And on September 15th, the board allocated $941,000 of the standard allowance unallocated that amount due to other funding for FF&E in the new facility. And in November 14th, 2023, the board reallocated half of that amount, or $470,000, back to the LAC Authority for needs. This is, again, a part of the $10 million of the standard allowance, which can be used on general government services, as the other $9 million plus has been. And so the reason that this is on the agenda today is I want to make clear that this is due to Hausman Construction and their change orders. This is not intended to fund any other purpose, such as expert legal fees or other purposes. The reality of this is if the board is going to reallocate this money at some point in this project, especially when you consider the extensive, eventually litigation cost. So it's either going to be done now or later, is how the two of us feel about this, knowing what we know. And there are change orders in excess of this amount, and it is the authority's job and the owner's rep's job to make sure only appropriate expenses are paid. And so that process is ongoing. But given all that, there is still going to be a need for this funding. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Nelson for any details he wants to provide on the use and appropriateness of this reallocation.
Thank you. You actually touched on most of it, but as we talked about Tuesday, we're still working with Hausman on the cost of the fire damper issue from last fall. If you were at that meeting, you recall that we did pay a little bit of that we agreed to, but there's still a large outstanding portion that we have not agreed to pay. And then as far as the recent delay, when we talk about the testing and balancing issues, we've started some new change directives or some construction directives there to get those valves and things switched out. And so that's another cost that the county is going to incur, wrongfully so. They are damages to the county. They should have been part of the original drawings and done correctly from the start. They are not. And so this money would help go for both of those items. But again, these are damages to the county. These are not at our fault. And these would be, monies that we would litigate for as part of our damage recoupment after it is built. But it is essential that we have that so that we can continue construction and get this thing done. And so I just want to be sure that everybody knows that this is not a change order for something that we want. This is not something that we're just spending willy-nilly. This is damages that we've incurred, and we need this to get it done, and we'll try to litigate to the best of our ability to get it all back.
Also, a very important distinction and a unfortunate challenge we have is we have both construction and design issues. And so we have, for anyone with a little bit of common sense, you have two entities, and we need one entity to continue to do construction work due to some issues caused by another entity, and there's some other things that work vice versa. So it's not as simple as just don't pay it. We need to pay it so they can do the corrections necessary that are also not, in this sense, their fault. So, Mr. Taylor.
But just a question of clarity, and I think you both did a good job of laying out. There is a contention about how much should actually be paid for it, is what I'm hearing you say, that although there are monies that are due for any change order that is really a part of what the owner is asking, so a construction company never initiates that. But because of some of the flaws, they are now incurring a cost. But if I'm hearing what you're saying correctly, you're not in necessary agreeance with what that cost is or should be. Is that a fair statement?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And then I just have a follow-up after that, if that's okay. So I'm going to be supportive tonight of this, but I'm really concerned when I saw this item. So I called Dennis, and I've talked to Mark and just wanted to get some background from the closed session, which I've listened to, and talked to Shane. So from the beginning of this project, we had a promise to taxpayers that we would not exceed legally a bond issue of $50.3 million. And now I know we're north of 70 million. I don't know if we're to 72 million yet. And we've tried to keep this thing funded with the goal of we've just got to get to finish. We've just got to get to finish. And I'm not trying to armchair quarterback, but just to kind of reiterate what the county has done, we've given $941,000 from ARPA that we already paid for FF&E, but we did it because we agreed, hey, they need the money. We concurred that the authority could use the interest, which is a legal opinion that they got, to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars because they needed the money. And then the $250,000 for a maintenance shed that wasn't built because they needed the money. And tonight we're approving another $471,000. And the point isn't to armchair quarterback. This is not against the authority or anything else. We understand the issues are not the fault of the authorities. But I think it's to make the point that there is no more money. After tonight, there is not a single dollar of ARPA money left. There's no more interest. There's no more bond capacity. Bottom line is the well is run dry. There's nothing left. And that's my concern is, with over 100 change orders that you know, if we don't expect to have any more of these, I'm just, after tonight, I can't support another dollar being given, and I don't even know where it would come from, and I think there's some legal issues that we're gonna be presented with in terms of trying to borrow or even couch it like we're taking it from reserves, and we'll pay it back, or we're doing CIP. So I know that that's a challenge. I appreciate all of the information Supervisor Nelson has provided weekly. But after tonight, there's no more money. And so that's a concern.
Sure, well, that's all of our concern, and that's why it's 471,000, not a different number. You know, this is the last of this funding source. Unfortunately, you may have to look at more funding down the road if needed for litigation, because that is not a quick process, and as you know, bringing forward an attorney for the county, that costs money, and we have the purse strings. So we hope that that's something that can be done expeditiously and in coordination with the LAC authority, but we don't know how that process is going to play out and exactly what we're going to be seeking. So, any other comments from the board?
I have a couple. I think obviously in September, you know, we discussed peeling it back. You know, we said we'd cross the bridge when we get there if we have to, you know, give anything back. And I think this is the bridge. We're there. I don't think at that moment in September, I thought, there's no way we're gonna be sitting here having to give it back, and yet here we are. Obviously a frustration, not just to me, but I think all of us sitting up here. And of course, anybody paying attention, I think it's frustrating to see. And I think just on a technical side of the item written in the agenda, it says due to change order submitted by general contractor. Technically, it's the authority that asks for a change order, and then, of course, the general contractor submits the price. So it's just due to change orders in general, you know. I wouldn't say necessarily Hausman's to blame for the change order. Hausman's just bidding a change order that we're asking for. So on a legal standpoint of that and the agenda, that's maybe how it should be worded. That's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. Bittinger, anything?
No comments. I'm good.
Ms. Taylor?
I do want to raise one other second issue, and it's somewhat related because we're on the funding for the LAC authority, and it's something I brought up to Supervisor Nelson. I just, you know, now with Kenny in the room and Mark, actually, and Dennis, this idea of the 28th Street project, there was a $210,000 CIP that, if my memory serves me correctly, this board for FY24 dedicated to a very laudable law enforcement protection measure, which was the Bearcat. And then afterwards found out, well, that had already been spoken for potentially for the 28th Street project. And so we don't have to solve that tonight. I know it's not on the agenda, but somehow, some way, those monies need to be reconciled between whether it's Mark, Kenny, Dennis, Shane, the authority, Supervisor Nelson. Because what I don't want to have happen is this $210,000 is looming out there, and then we find, oh, we need to do this for FY25, but, oh, by the way, we already certified. So I just want to make sure that, and again, we don't need to hammer that out tonight, but that's something on everybody's radar, so. Thank you.
And they were also seeking a grant for part of that, correct?
I think it was like 69,000, 68,000 for that portion, but this 210,000 from CIP sounded like there's some conflict over
There's
whether.
210 from CIP, there's also 100,000 from the tasers left over, sheriff's radios, and hopefully they can raise 69,000.
Yeah, so it's that
Through
200.
donations,
Yeah,
whatever.
so it's that 210 that we approved through CIP that I was understanding may have been kind of double spoken for on that 210.
Well,
And-
they have and they haven't. We have never got a final bill from Sioux City or Sioux City Engineering. We have no clue what this is gonna cost. And this has gone on for 2 years, about a year too long. Something needs to be done, push somewhere, so we know where we're at.
So we're finalizing the bill on 28th Street. I don't have the exact number, but it's going to be very close to 227,000.
Okay.
That's, I think that's actually over what was actually bid. These are additional costs, right, Kenny?
These are additional costs and change orders, yes.
Again, here we are hit again with change orders and additional costs.
And I expect to bring that to the board hopefully in 2 or 3 weeks for approval.
Okay, thank you.
Since I'm new on board, what was the arrangement on that street with the city and the county?
They would pay up, I think, 2.7 million, Kenny, then we covered the rest.
I'd have to look at it to see how it actually reads, Dennis, but yes. And the reason for the change orders are some discrepancies in quantities. So this is something I would advise the board to never do again. Do not lead the project on a street. Let the city handle it. I say that because it's not like other projects that the county does. It's not bid in the same manner. It's not handled in the same manner. And I think our county roads department can give some input on that. But basically, prices on a project like a street are based on quantities. So if a quantity changes on a particular item, let's say the depth of concrete changes by a ½ inch, or you add a curb, or you add a drain. Those are all based on quantities. They're based on, let's say, $10 to add an additional drain, whatever that number might be. But if you use 40 instead of the expected 25, the contract says you're going to pay by quantity. So that's where a lot of these changes came in on our 28th Street project.
So was that approved, you know, again, this is all before, so was that approved down here, or was that approved on the LEC side? Who did, or who oversaw that project from the county side?
It was the county, wasn't it?
The county did, it's a
Yeah.
county
Okay.
project.
And that change order, if I remember right, that was an additional driveway that was missed by the original engineer estimate, which I think was done by the city.
There are several change orders, driveways with a plural. So some things weren't taken into consideration, such as farmers' entrances into their pastures where they keep cattle. So additional items like that were added. So once you put a street in and you actually raise up what used to be a gravel road, now you can no longer get your equipment in to get your cattle out of your pasture. So you have to create new driveways to do that. Once you change the driveways, you're now changing the gates that were actually there. So now you're adding gates. So those are additional change orders that were part of this project. There were several others, such as additional striping that was needed due to Outer Belt Drive. So just a lot of different things that added up.
But to Mark's question, do you remember the original, and this is a question for either of the three of the triumvirate, do you remember what the breakdown was in the agreement between the county and the city?
I don't remember without
If I
looking,
recall
Jeremy.
right, it's 2.75 million.
Say that
City
again,
would
Dennis, sorry.
contribute,
The city capped at 2.75?
yes. Anything above that, we did. Now, there's another ingredient too, is Mid-America did require extra things, but they did pay the city back for that
Yes.
when they're building their building out there. We didn't pay for that.
But whatever that funding agreement said, the city said, once we hit 2.75 million,
They're
we're,
done.
we're out. And so any change orders are gonna be due to, completely to the county and no pro rata splitting of anything, is that?
Right. Now, just for ease of mind, Elk Creek Road will be headed up by Sioux City. So they'll do the whole project, As I understand, we'll reimburse them.
That's far off topic, isn't it?
Well, for the record,
that far.
our
Oak
engineer,
Creek Road.
so anybody watching on YouTube that didn't hear that, the engineer stated that he was not involved in the negotiations on the 28th Street project. And I do believe that was true. It was mostly between the board and the city of Sioux City at the time. And I thought it was about a 5.5, and we're gonna be basically seeing it half. Now, were the change orders somewhere around 300,000? Is that the number that I'm remembering right?
Yes.
Okay, so that's where we had figured around 300,000. It is a separate project from the LEC, but it is also part of what was needed to get it done. And then to reiterate, by doing this project, it helped lead to more development out there. Obviously, Mid-American wasn't gonna build that out there on a gravel road. And we also got the fiber and the utilities out there. And, we just had a presentation from Agape. They wouldn't be looking to go out there if it was on a gravel road with no utilities. So there's development happening because of this. That development pays back the taxes. So hindsight-wise, it's still a good project. Maybe it would have been good to have had Mark in the room in the negotiation side of it because, he would have probably been able to foresee some of those things that were missed, like the farmers' access points. And obviously, to your point, you were stating that we're working with the city on another road project. Mark was heavily involved in that project, so.
Mr. Taylor?
So I just want to make sure somebody's looked at this contract again in the last, there's a lot of, well, this is what our understanding is. And you've obviously been tied up with 150 other things, probably the 28th Street project and the contract language. But if it was 2.75 and 2.75 million, I saw that look in Supervisor Nelson's eyes, like, why aren't they paying half of the change orders? Unless I'm,
Yeah, and that was gonna be, and I apologize, because I'm just getting up to speed on this, but is this a city, when it's all said and done, is this a city street or county street, or is it shared?
City.
Okay,
It's a city street, but it's complete.
and see, I just think that if
Mr.
it,
Chair, I'm sorry, but can we have Joshua advise on this, since we're talking about two different projects? We're talking about the 28th Street project and the ARPA funding action item. Is this okay to discuss this, or should this be an additional agenda item down the road?
Yeah, is this gonna be brought back in a couple of weeks, like you said, Kenny?
Yes.
Okay, this will be discussed. Joshua, anything to add?
I think it's a legitimate issue that Ms. Scaff raises.
Okay, let's discuss it when you bring it up.
Absolutely. Thank you.
and if I could just close by saying, for that future, it would be good to have that contract language so we know whether we're appropriately or inappropriately spending taxpayer dollars
Yes,
on
just,
something we're not obligated to.
just to follow up on that question quickly. Our engineer is responsible for, not the county engineer, the engineer hired for the 28th Street project is responsible for the oversight of all of that and tracking that, which he has been doing for us.
Thank you. I'll move the item with the change in the language to say, due to change orders fulfilled by general contractor Hausman Construction.
Second?
Second by Bittinger. Any final discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Item 9 is reports on committee meetings.
We have Veterans Affairs, and really appreciate the series of outreach meetings in the rural areas and the fact that they have people going to their summer schoolings and yet are covering down the office. So that's about it.
I did have Simcoe's exec meeting. I don't remember where I left it last time. I did mention that Erin Berzina was going to be leaving Simcoe. We did announce that she was replaced by Corrine Erickson, if I remember right. That was discussed, and of course, just general business with Simcoe.
why don't you go to quite a bit?
Sure, yeah. Last week, Supervisor Ung and I were at ISAC, and
So wasn't able to attend our Veterans Affair meeting or our SHIP meeting, but I'll have updates next week on that. But ISAC was good, learned about county structure, HR, and it was good to see our engineer and treasurer there. And so, but I'll have some updates next week but from ISAC, so that's all I have. Yep.
Had a 911 board meeting last Wednesday. We approved the budget there. And then Thursday, last week, had a conservation board meeting. Talked about Little Sioux Park. I was actually through there, not this past Sunday, but the Sunday prior, checking up on the camping sewer project down there. And they've got the lines all run, and I was telling Dan Heisel, I was very praiseworthy of the work that had gone on down there. You could hardly see the trench where they had run the lines. They had worked the ground so nice, and they ended up getting it seeded right in front of this last rain. So they hit that perfect. They had two contractors doing that project, one running the line, and then the other one that's coming to install the actual system. And that contractor, I think, is set to maybe come this next week. Their goal was to have it done before Memorial Weekend and everything ready for the campers. And if the weather holds, they should be done well in front of that. So the project's kind of running ahead of schedule, which is great. And I know a lot of folks are looking forward to that. The swim pond down there is very low, so I would not look to that for that to be open this year, unfortunately. And I think they're actually having some water issues down there with one of their wells that supplies water to the campground, so they may have to dig another well down there, which is unfortunate, but we continue to be in this prolonged drought, and that's nothing we can do about it. So that's that. I would like to talk a little bit about the drainage meeting, the farmers' drainage meeting that was last Thursday morning. That way, if Mayor Nelson likes to make some comments during citizen concerns as to what I said, if I got anything wrong, he can add or subtract from that. But Farmers Drainage District had a meeting in Sloan last Thursday morning, and I went. Obviously, one of the things they were talking about was Salix and the future of Salix. You know, right now they have a pumping agreement into farmers, but the question is, can they annex Salix? Does Salix need to create a whole new district? That sort of thing. It was a really great meeting. There was 3 council people there from Salix. The city clerk was there. There was a lot of great discussion, and I'll just kind of touch on some of the things that were talked about to clarify for all of us sitting up here where this thing is at. So in order for farmers to annex somebody, the water has to drain naturally, and there has to be a benefit. And the problem that they have is legally they don't know if they can actually prove a benefit. Engineering-wise, they're not sure that Salix can naturally drain into the district. So those are 2 issues that Patrick from V&K is going to look at as far as the natural drainage, and that's one thing that farmer's attorney or Salix's attorney, somebody's going to look into as far as the legality of can they even annex it in. Okay, so if they can annex them in, what is the next option? So what we talked about is, and this was Patrick Mao talked about this, was that Salix could still create their own drainage district or a pumping district for the town. And most likely, they would probably need to buy a few acres of land and create a small retention pond to hold some of that water, and then get a pump, and then pay farmers, similar to what they are now, to pump that water from that retention pond back into their district. And everyone seemed to be very, open to that idea. The problem farmers have is they have some work on lateral H that they're doing that involves the county and secondary roads as far as moving the ditch away from the road. They need to get that done, so that's one part of it. But I think there's 2 hurdles that we talked about for Salix, and this is unfortunate that because of House File 718, most likely they cannot grow their budget enough to pay the pumping bill. The city government can't grow their budget enough to pay the pumping bill to pump the water. So that's why Patrick thinks that they'll probably have to create a district regardless, because then the fees can be contained in that and kind of bypass city government. But the other problem we have is that so not only is the state legislature not wanting to stop with 718, is they're looking to move drainage districts from the creation at the county level to Des Moines. So potentially all the work that we're doing here could be for naught. I have no idea how they think they're going to get it done in Des Moines when this has been extremely complicated process with a lot of people who know what they're doing. So anyway, we'll have to see on how some of that shakes out, but it was a good discussion, very good discussion, very fruitful. Salix has 21 months left that they can pump into farmers, and so we've got time. But anyway, that's in a nutshell my quick report from that.
Yeah, the House File 718 issue at ISAC was, I mean, beyond any other issue I've ever experienced at those conferences. The whole room was in agreement. I mean, I think the counties that were the reason for that legislation probably weren't even there. They probably float above such things, don't attend ISAC in Des Moines. But every single, I mean, you had the representatives of the affiliates just saying, we tried, you know, we told them, they know, but they get an idea in their heads and they do it. And, you know, they have the trifecta, obviously, in Des Moines, and if they want to pass something, they'll pass it. But they didn't anticipate there's going to be any repeal of major parts of it, since it still has to be implemented fully, and we still have to find out what sort of things in it need to be fixed or what things break. They might have some tweaks over the next couple of years, but it's going to take probably 2 to 4 years to fix a lot of these issues, and the costs are already starting. I mean, just this week we had a almost $25,000-ish outflow to send out a required mailer that may confuse people because it's going to be received at the same time as their assessments, and you know, those are state questions. I would direct anyone to their state representative for those. But yeah, the inability to grow budgets when needed for a purpose like this is just, it takes away all of the, and we've talked about this, you know, we've talked about this with our legislators in this very room, and it just feels like local government is just a pawn in the game. But it's amazing to see everyone united on such, you know, all the counties, they feel the same way because they just want to do what's right by their communities, and it's becoming impossible to communicate the difference between assessments and valuations and taxes when the formula gets more and more complex and you can't respond to community needs. So anyway, off my soapbox. Item 10, any citizen concerns?
Hey everybody, Kevin Nelson, Mayor of Salix, 406 Willow Street. I always want to give everybody else an option to jump up, but nobody seems to do it. It's going to be brief because Supervisor Nelson, you covered it excellently. I only have two very minor things. I agree, everyone that came back to the council meeting, because we held our council meeting Thursday night afterwards to discuss it. And they all said it was a great meeting, positive energy, so that's great. Just for the folks that weren't there, the proposed drainage district would still go to the interstate. If you recall, it was to the interstate, then under the interstate to Snyder's Bed. The idea now is to the interstate and a little bit south, but wouldn't go under the interstate, wouldn't go to Snyder's Bend, because then instead it would have a long-term pumping agreement between two established districts to pump the water across railroad tracks into the farmers drainage district. So it would be a shrinkage of the people involved, and you wouldn't have to have another public hearing because it's a contraction of the folks that were already notified. Just want to have that clarification out there so you can all kind of picture that in your head. And so that leads me to why I'm really here is to request that you put on your agenda next week to postpone the approval of or review of the Salix Drainage District for 3 months until I suggest June 18th, so that B&K can do some additional work for you and look into those options and have concrete answers. So that's all I have. Happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, Mark did a great job.
Yeah, it's interesting because like the natural drainage of that district, what is it, your basements, you know? I mean,
Most of it is, but most of it goes south. Apparently 40 years ago, 50 years ago, there was a culvert, a tunnel underneath the railroad tracks, like 3 blocks south. And somewhere along the way in the last 30 years, some farmer plugged it up permanently. So now it can't drain naturally to the south, which it did for decades, if not centuries before then. So that's why we have to pump.
It'd almost be like nice, we're talking our parks, drought over on eastern Woodbury County, like capture this stuff and use it. I don't know, but obviously you got rainy years and you got dry years and, there's still challenges ahead, but yeah, the 3 months, I guess, we'll put that. I mean, that's the chair's job, not mine, so I guess I'll shut up.
Sure. You know, you can't do it during the citizen concerns anyway, so put it on your agenda for Tuesday and discuss and debate and do an extension for at least 3 months is my thinking, but I propose 3 months just to keep everybody on task. If you give them like 6 months, then maybe they're not focused on getting the work done and actually evaluating the issue. So, but up to your discretion.
Up and until House File 718 is repealed.
That too,
Yeah.
that too.
Hopefully it doesn't take that long.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mark, did you have a citizen concern?
Yeah, I had two. We had extensive discussion on House File 718 in the County Engineers Association. We did get a response finally from Senator Sinclair, who's the president of the Iowa Senate, that none of the three alternatives that I had suggested would work. Their concern is about there's 30 counties apparently that are currently levying beyond what the state limits are for property taxes within their counties. I would love to trade property tax bills with Senator Sinclair. Hers is quite a bit cheaper than mine on a much nicer house, but she is in one of those counties where their assessment is higher than the allowable 350 and 395. They've done this legally in accordance with the code in those counties. They don't have population or valuation to be able to fund the programs that they're required to provide to their citizens. And it's been with citizen consent that they've gotten it done, and apparently that caused a problem for the legislature. The County Engineers Association is meeting on Thursday. I'm in a committee of about 7 or 8 county engineers. We came up with some outside the box thoughts on how to protect some of the counties that are nearing the same boat Woodbury is, where we're having that issue with making the 75% minimum local effort for the road department. That doesn't solve all the problems 718 has caused, but at least it is taking care of the problems with ability to use farm to market money and perhaps the road use tax fund penalty that happens if we fail to meet that amount as well. So I'll keep the board updated as we work through that. Apparently there was some frustration expressed by some legislators. I've shared everything I've sent off to them with you folks. I think I've been pretty courteous, but apparently they don't like having errors pointed out or something. But that's all I'll say about that. On a better note, I wanted to report we had our first meeting with the contractor that's doing our grant application for the federal aid funds. Their contacts at Federal Highway Administration said that the grant notice of funding opportunity is going to be coming out early. They're talking about last week of March, first week of April. That's 2.5 months earlier than it was last year. So I just want to thank the board for allowing us to get out ahead of this. We can still meet the schedule of having that grant application ready to turn in by May. Had we not gotten on board with that as quickly as we did, we would be having difficulty catching up to what that schedule is going to bring for us. So thank you for working with us on that and helping keep that moving forward.
Thank you. Any other citizen concerns? Hearing none. Item 11, any board concerns? Mr. Taylor?
Just wondering, and Mark, sorry, now that you sat down, but if there's any update on adjacent to Elk Creek, the old Lakeport Road and access. I know I've asked you a couple of times, and sorry to keep beating the dead horse, but on behalf of 18 or 19 families, just wondering.
They're working on the easement yet. There is a split on the value of that.
A split meaning a disagreement?
a disagreement on
Okay.
how much that easement should be worth.
Okay,
The board has a preset value on temporary easements, which is more than what the city typically pay. I've got to talk to the city staff yet. I've been tied up with a couple of other issues here the first couple of days. So I want to get back into where those negotiations lie right now. I'm hearing something from a third party. I want to get that confirmed from city staff who's working on it.
thank you.
Any other board concerns?
Oh, I've got concerns. We're 3 days into National Ag Week, and I haven't heard any ag facts.
Do
So,
you have any?
oh, I've got ag facts. You bet. And I'd love to share them.
Okay.
So this is from Woodbury County. This is from the National Ag Statistics Service. This is from their latest census, which is kind of old because the current one, they don't have the information yet. So I believe this is from the 2017 census that the data would have been released several years after that. But here we go. Woodbury County is home to 1,037 farms with an average size of 435 acres. We have 19,110 jobs in Woodbury County in agriculture. In fact, 28% of residents are employed by ag or ag-related industries in Woodbury County. We have $169 million in value added from agriculture in Woodbury County, $961 million in wages related to agriculture in Woodbury County, $524 million in ag sales. We have roughly 38,000 cattle on feed anytime in Woodbury County, 70,000 hogs on feed, and in a year's time, we will sell 135,000 cattle and roughly 190,000 hogs. So support the farmers this week and buy a steak, buy a pork chop, maybe chicken, I don't know. Eggs, if you want to, you know. Support your local eggs, you know, yeah. But otherwise, thanks to all the farmers that do what they do. So.
It's good to be a carnivore, help out the local economy. Any other board concerns? All right, you're adjourned.